So Thursday edition, Orange and Blue Today, Cecil Lammy, Andrew Mason talking Denver Broncos football. Not just Omarion Hampton talk today, Mace, but as Yoda said, there is another.
Well, there are plenty of others. But there's a reason why those others aren't regarded with the same kind of draft buzz as Omarion Hampton and Ashton Jensen. Of course, one of those others you see right there. You see a bunch of others in the background, of course, from the NFL Scouting Combine. But you see on the right there, Judkins, who the Broncos are going to have one of their 30 visits with, as was reported today. So another piece of the puzzle falls into place as far as the Broncos doing their due diligence at the running back position. Of course, you asked Judkins' Ohio State teammate, Trevion Henderson, about whether he met with the Broncos at the Combine. He gave you an answer that said, yes, he met with them, but it wasn't really all that clear from Henderson whether it was a formal meeting or an informal meeting, unlike the answers we were able to get from guys like Ashton Jeanty, Omarion Hampton, Brashard Smith, Ollie Gordon, etc., who all said they had formal meetings with the Broncos.
Yeah, and we have to ask, is Omarion Hampton the best option? Before we get to Judkins and his skill and how he fits, perhaps not as the Kamara.
Definitely not. No.
Put a pin in that one.
Okay. He is not a quote-unquote Joker type back.
Let's talk about Omarion Hampton first. And the reason I say best option is based on what Mel Kiper said in your conference call that you had a chance to toss him some Broncos questions, Mace. And the fact of okay, Hampton is now everybody's number 2. Rewind a month or two ago, Caleb Johnson was everybody's number 2, but Hampton has moved into that position for legitimate reasons. But if it's moving up and trading assets for Jeanty or staying at 20 and getting Hampton, is Hampton not the best option for the Broncos?
Because you can keep your assets. The question is, are you going to be able to do that? Because there are scenarios where Omarion Hampton doesn't fall to you, and Kiper offered one of those in his mock draft by having the Dallas Cowboys pick up Omarion Hampton at number 12. Of course, then he offered the scenario where the Cowboys took Tedero McMillan at number 12, and then Omarion Hampton would fall to number 20 and would be right there for the Denver Broncos. I mean, I think if you were looking at sort of a perfect cherry on the sundae of this offseason, what the Broncos have done so far, that they were able to cross off inside linebacker with Dre Greenlaw. They were able to bring in Hufanga at safety. So you were able to get big upgrades in the back 2 levels of the spine of the defense. You were able to find a pass catching tight end in Evan Engram. So you took care of some glitches. Probably the only thing that you've taken a hit on right now is you did downgrade at punter. You're going to be able to read more about that at denversports.com tonight. I dive into the numbers on Matt Hawk. There's a lot of numbers that basically show he's a below average punter. That's just what he is at this point and what he has been for most of his career. But if on balance you take downgrading at punter to upgrade those other spots, and if you're able to get Omarion Hampton there and have a plug and play running back like that, I think you take that all day. And then you find the compliment to him later on in the draft, or maybe the compliment to him as that bruising back to take some of the pressure off him. Maybe the compliment's already within the house. Omarion Hampton, the compliment to him could be an Audric Estime, perhaps.
Yeah, it could be an Estime if he emerges and takes that next step. I tend to believe that running backs show it quickly, and Estime did not show it quickly. So I'm not writing him off, Mace, but it's kind of a red flag there for Estime. And I talked to Mike Kliss today on Dover and Cecil, and Kliss said maybe it's not a J.K. Dobbins, but it could be a free agent role player. Because if it's Omarion Hampton, he's the stud. He's the man, right? And we'll play the clip from Mel Kiper here in just a little bit. But when he said role player, my mind went immediately to Jamal Williams. Like, that's a role player. That's a guy that can come in, and Hampton's your stud, and then Jamal's there for some red zone work. Wasn't that long ago he pushed for, 20 touchdowns a couple of seasons ago with Detroit. Jamal Williams also has the Mickey Loomis stamp of approval as a former Saints player, Dan Campbell stamp of approval. So Hampton could be the best choice because of value and because he's the stud, and now there's someone else you could get. Jamal Williams, maybe a later round draft pick, that is your complementary back.
Yeah, and Jamal Williams is just the guy you kind of send up the gut on short yardage. And that would be perfect. I mean, you save a little bit of the wear and tear on Omarion Hampton, but the thing is, to me, for that to work, you would need to have the primary back come out of the draft. That's the only way that works. To me, Jamal Williams in there doesn't necessarily work if you're not getting your running back until round 3. Jamal Williams as a partner, I think you got Omarion Hampton, or somehow Ashton Genty fell to a point where you were able to trade up for him.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even mind our guy, Mad Fanatic, which I don't know if y'all listen to Mad Fanatic, but you should listen to Mad Fanatic. He's in our chat room right now talking about TreVeyon Henderson. TreVeyon Henderson in the second, if he's there at 51, or move up like you did for Javonte Williams, Mace. If you could move up for 35 or something like that, 37, and somehow, by chance, TreVeyon Henderson is there, I think you couple that with the Jamal Williams, that would make some sense. But Hampton, if he's there at 20, I think he's the pick, even if Colston Loveland's there.
Well, or with Henderson, I mean, I touched on this yesterday. What about the notion of, and this is maybe if Hampton's not there at 20, maybe someone's grabbed him, trading down. If you add an extra day 3 pick, what about the notion of getting Judkins and Henderson and putting the Ohio State band back together?
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. It's something that I'm fearful the Raiders would do, because both backs, I believe, talked about Chip Kelly when we talked to him at the Combine, Mace, and they like Chip Kelly a lot. And we cannot overlook that. The Raiders, we can make fun of them, whatever, but like that team with Chip Kelly eventually could make some noise. And I don't want them to have both Ohio State backs.
Well, the other thing is also sometimes you wonder about, if you've got 2 running backs in there, how they handle the load. Is there a little bit of envy, jealousy, whatever? If you have 2 guys who already know how to work well together, know how to share, if you already have that harmony, I think then you understand it's going to fit very well in the entire team concept. Like sometimes if you bring in guys, you're not sure how the egos are going to work. If all of a sudden, now all of a sudden you're only touching the ball 250 times in a season, right? You wouldn't worry about that with Judkins and Henderson. They know how to share. They know how to be a part of letting the other guy have that share of the workload. So, and they understand that their partner does some things better. That, okay, Henderson has the in space dynamic skill set. Judkins has the plow horse through the middle, run over people skill set. Judkins, heck, I mean, Judkins is such a force. I mean, watching him closely during the college football playoff, watching him run over people. I mean, you could use him as a fullback if you wanted to on some snaps, because he's got such power to him.
Right. And he's got some speed to him as well. We saw that as Ohio State marched on through the college football season. It's not just the power, it's some speed as well. So Henderson as a receiver, as a player in space, as a player who could be your Kamara, Judkins as your Mark Ingram, basically. And we've said it before, Mace, they kind of need both. You know, maybe Estime's the guy, maybe not. I tend to be a little bit more down on Estime, and I could be totally wrong on that, Mace. I fully, realize that. But for me, if you could get both Ohio State backs, seems like a pipe dream. Somehow, some way, it'd have to be like a second and a fourth or something like that to make that work, and then hope that Judkins would be there, because I see Travion as a second round pick and maybe end of the first round pick based on, if Hampton goes a little bit early. And I see Judkins as a third round pick. So Broncos have to get a little lucky there to get both.
Yeah, that's you would. And again, you'd have to, like I said, the only way you're talking about both is you're probably talking about a trade down. You're not talking about both if you keep 20. And if you keep 20, you don't take a running back, if you take a defensive lineman, then I think you move yourself out of the equation. If you're getting both your running backs, you're doing it in a different way.
Yeah. And Mel Kiper, back to the Omarion Hampton thing, before we get more into Judkins here. We've got the clip, Mace. You want to pull that one up? And I believe it was off your question, right? With Mel Kiper and talking about how the difference between Hampton and Ginty. Because Ginty is
not offline.
Number one running back to a lot of people out there. Not everybody. And everyone's got different opinions, right? That's fine. But most everyone in the scouting community has Ashton Ginty number one. Love Trevion Henderson, but he's not the best back in this class. That's my opinion. Omarion Hampton is number 2. Trevion Henderson is number 3. But what's the difference between 2 and 1? Mel Kiper might think it's a little bit closer than some think.
Or specifically, some people around the NFL may not think there's a big difference. That's the key thing, and that's what Mel Kiper Jr. is hearing.
Now, Hampton's not that far off from Ginty when you talk to people in the league. He's got the ability to run hard inside, run tough up the gut, and bounce it outside. He's got that burst. He broke a lot of tackles. He had 2 really productive years. He smells the goal line. He caught the ball well. He blocked. He's ready to go. I mean, and he tested extremely well at the combine in terms of that speed to hit the home run. So I think he's in the mix.
Speed to hit the home run. I like the sound of that. Plus, over 1,000 yards after contact this year, 4.2 yards after contact this year. So if you want to say shades of Nick Chubb, shades of a pre-injury Javonte Williams, I agree with both of those takes for Omarion Hampton.
I think he has better vision than Javonte Williams had.
Yes, 1,000%.
Yeah. I think that's the difference. That's one of the reasons why you're talking about Omarion Hampton as a first rounder and why Javonte Williams settled as a second rounder.
Mm-hmm.
The vision is a thing that sort of dropped him. Vision, and also, and we saw this from time to time, Javonte had a little bit higher of a drop rate than you would like. In fact, I know this came up in a discussion recently that I was having on social media with somebody about, the Broncos were one of the league leaders in drops, but one of the things with the drop passes last year is, you took plenty of the drops off the roster when you parted ways with Javonte Williams.
Mm-hmm.
So something to consider.
And you want Bo Nix to have that outlet, that security blanket. Hampton, Henderson would be the guys there for this team. And Mace, it is the search for the Alvin Kamara, the search for the Joker. And there's plenty of different options that we've talked about. And even Mel Kiper's brought up in your conference call and the conference call that he had with the media. I love this draft because I think Kiper said, get your guy. Well, who's your guy? Who's Sean Payton's guy? We're fixing to find that out. We're left to kind of try to assemble some of the clues here.
Well, who's your guy? Depends what you're looking for. I mean, it's the whole thing of the different flavors that George Payton talked about, right?
Right.
What do you want? Or who's your guys? That's the other thing. You're putting it together. Who are your guys?
Mm-hmm.
And when can you get those guys? And this is the other thing in particular as well. When do you want to get them? And what is the difference between early and later on? To just use the Mel Kiper Jr. number, he suggested 31 draftable grades on running back. So think about that for a moment. Roughly a round of draftable running backs, an entire round of draftable running backs. And so when you have a number like that, there are going to be teams, and the Broncos could be among them, that say, okay, since there's not a scarcity of running backs, let's take care of a position where there is a bit more scarcity. Now, we talked about this in January and February. It's the whole tight end versus running back discussion. It's a good year for tight ends, but there aren't 31 draftable tight ends like 31 draftable running backs. So that was why before the Evan Engram signing, and just because they signed Engram, they're not out of it. I mean, you mentioned Colston Loveland a few minutes ago. They're not off the board for taking Colston Loveland if he falls to 20, or if he even falls to 16, 17, a reasonable trade up. That is not out of the question, even after the Engram signing, because that Engram contract is a short-term contract. So that is not off the radar at this point for the Broncos. So just bear that in mind.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit more scarcity on tight ends than running backs. Do you take this? So, for example, that, or even, defensive linemen, it's a fairly deep class, but maybe you don't think there are as many good defensive linemen as running backs. Do you take the defensive lineman early and say, okay, more running backs later, we can get that guy later? There's validity to that. Kuiper used receiver as an example with Teteroa McMillan. Get T-Mac now, because it's not a good year for receivers, and then you can cross off running back later where there's more guys. But there's a reason why Genty and Hampton are at the top of the draft.
But I do think that Genty and Hampton are a cut above. And then a Caleb Johnson would fall in third, and then Judkins and Henderson and Sampson and Allen. That group, it's opinions all over the place. But I do think there are two, I'd say, more elite backs would be Genty and Hampton, and then the group of guys bunched together in that next tier, and then a third tier, and then a fourth tier. So I do think Genty and Hampton are the only two that I would say are special. Potentially elite backs in the NFL would be those two.
Okay.
Love that word, special.
Special.
Mm-hmm.
Well, special is what you build around. Special is what you back up the Brinks truck for after 4 years if that player's playing at a high level.
Special is the missing link. He talked about it in the conference call of Saquon Barkley being the missing link for the Eagles.
Special is what transformed the Eagles from pretty good team to world champion.
Yep.
The Broncos are 10-7. They were missing that dynamic element in the backfield last year. Sean Payton said the two things that help a quarterback come along the most when they're a young quarterback are defense and a strong running game. For most of the year, you had the defensive element. Broke down a bit in December. But for most of the year, you had that to support Bo Nix. You didn't really have the running game at all throughout the season. But you had the run blocking, because there you were, number one in the league, run block win rate per ESPN Analytics.
Yep.
That was there. The holes were there. The opportunities were there. So if you get that level of run blocking again, or even close to it, even, let's assume it's not number one again. So let's say it's top 5, top 10 even.
Right.
Somewhere in the ballpark. And you put a potentially special running back behind that, with what you hope is Bo Nix taking some steps forward in year 2, young receivers hopefully taking some steps forward as they achieve greater cohesion with a young quarterback, the improvement at tight end. If that happens, you can withstand maybe some regression on the defensive side, because, if you're Pat Surtain, where do you go from DPOY? Where do you go from as high up as you can get?
Right.
On balance, maybe you have a few guys regressing a bit, but you have a sanction. And by the way, you've taken that up higher because you have the running back that's pushed the whole thing higher.
You want to maximize your playoff
Yeah.
chances, Mace? That comes from a back. And you want to really maximize your chances? That comes from a special back.
A special back really would microwave this. To the point where, and I say this, how I tend to have a lot of discretion and caution. Omarion Hampton or Ashton Genty, and obviously it's more likely to be Hampton.
Sure.
So I'll say Omarion Hampton on the Denver Broncos transforms this team into one that can end the Kansas City Chiefs streak of division titles. Period.
And if that's not a clip, I don't know what is, brother, because you are the steady one. I'm the emotional and opinionated one. So we make a good combination that way.
Yeah.
But that's very well said. And also it's very true. And the truth is belligerent by its very nature.
Yeah. And isn't that worth kind of chucking the notions of positional value, all that, and saying, okay, if he's a running back, you believe he can be special, go get the special guy right there in round one.
Yep. Don't wait. Don't hesitate. And where's the missing link? And what's the timeline of your window? Do you think Sean Payton thinks they're a couple years away, Mace? Or do you think Sean Payton thinks they can win right now?
I think he believes with the right moves, they can win now.
Yep.
The right pieces.
Yep.
Now, I think he understands that there's going to be some regression. He saw this in New Orleans. He saw a Saints team in 2006 that went 10-6 and then regressed back to 7-9 and then 8-8 before going 13-3. So he saw a team make a leap, have some regression, and then build back up to where, and then become a world champion. So he knows it's not necessarily an incline. And there are scenarios where the Broncos can be a much better team and have the same record. But I think if you bring in a running back who can be special, I think that's transformative. If it's Genty or Hampton, I think that can change the entire complexion of this team. Put one of them behind that offensive line, and I think you can raise the expectation level around here.
Yeah, look out. Look out in a big way if it's Omarion Hampton there. Again, most likely and perhaps best because you don't have to give up those options. The final point that I have on the Ohio State backs as we wrap up today's show, Mace, is merely this. Judkins and going through the gauntlet of Ole Miss. And there was some buzz around the combine, mainly from media types, that was like, we'll ask him about the Ole Miss days and what he do at Ole Miss and how things fell apart at Ole Miss. Okay, guys can change and guys can grow. I want to make that very clear, first and foremost. And Trevion Henderson talked about that as well at the combine. He talked about his relationship and his faith. And he also talked about his anger issues that he had as a younger player and how he's channeled that onto the field. And I'm not going to quote Patches O'Houlihan, although, yes, I am. You got to get angry. You got to get mean. And Trevion Henderson understands that the anger issues that he had as a younger man now somewhat dissipated through his faith, but also channeled through to the football field. So I like both of those young men. Judkins is different, went through the gauntlet Ole Miss. And again, guys can change. Guys aren't. Joe Flacco ran from competition at Pitt. From, I believe, Tyler Palco, to correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But like that, come on, man. We can't just go on, well, at Ole Miss. Well, at Auburn, Bo Nix didn't get it done. And then he got it done at Oregon, and he's the flipping franchise quarterback for the Broncos. So I don't want to hear that stuff about Judkins.
Aren't the college years about growing and learning from that?
Shouldn't they be?
Yes. Honestly, I like having somebody who's made some mistakes and learn from them.
That's better. The best people I know, Mace, just on a personal standpoint, have been through some some stuff.
Yeah. If they've never encountered adversity, if they've never had failure in some way, how do you know how they're going to react when failure does come in the NFL? Because it will happen.
1000%.
Everybody.
Yep.
Yeah, it even happens to Patrick Mahomes. Look at the Super Bowl. 2 Super Bowls. I mean, the NFL humbles everybody, no matter how charmed your football life has been at every level, being the best player on the field, being told you're awesome at every step. At some point, when you get to this apex level, you get humbled, you get beat down. How do you handle that? And that's why, that's why I have a little bit of a preference to somebody who's been knocked down, who's, maybe been a part of a losing team. I mean, if you, the whole quarterback wins thing. I mean, if you went by QB wins, you wouldn't have drafted John Elway, right?
Right. People tend to forget that, Mace.
Yeah.
But let history be your guide.
So
what's John Elway without TD? And I'm not comparing Genty or Hampton to TD, but you get special in this town on that team with Sean Payton and Bo Nix. You get special. That's young and hungry and dangerous.
Yeah. And this team's going to be hungry after that playoff game. After that loss, they got that taste of understanding, man, this is how we got to step it up. This is what we've got to do if we want to succeed when it matters the most. That's going to drive them, starting when they show up for weightlifting and conditioning, when they come back to Broncos Park, powered by Common Spirit next month. They're going to walk in there with a greater understanding of just what kind of work you have to put in if you're going to succeed in the places they failed last year, that they fell short. Yeah, they almost got it done in Kansas City. And if not for the blocked field goal, they would have got it done. But they didn't. They didn't get it done in Baltimore. They didn't get it done in Cincinnati. They didn't get it done in Buffalo. They've learned that they've learned where they fell short this coming season, as we've talked about, with this schedule being incredibly demanding, because you're going to have to go to Kansas City again, of course, but you're going to have to go to Philadelphia and to Washington, where those two teams were in the conference championship game. You don't get any. You're not getting any free rides. There are not many free spaces on this board in 2025. So you've got to have more, and you're not going to be a playoff team unless you figure out how to win some of those games where you fell short last year. That's the storyline of this year, my friend. And you're going to have more, whether it's a little bit more effort, a little bit more juice, or a little bit more in terms of personnel, like what you're hoping to get at running back, probably out of the draft.
Well, we need some juice on our YouTube channel, Mace. As you so succinctly wrap up today's program, how can people help us out here on YouTube?
Like,
comment,
share,
subscribe,
hit that notification bell,
and say it with us so that you
never
miss a vid. That's right. He's Andrew Mason. You follow him on all the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at C Salami saying OBT's BFD. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Stay frosty.